Okay. So, any just any questions, any sort of things on your mind before kind of we go a little bit deeper into one of the text? Do you guys have a microphone? Oh,
Question about, uh,
I think. Sorry.
oh, I'm sorry, please. Please go for it. Oh. You talked about not dwelling, but then earlier you had talked about we need to stay with our affliction. So what's the distinction you're making there?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a style of practice that I'm not going too much into like the practice of it this time, but into more embodiment practices for that kind of thing. But there's a practice where you're allowing yourself to feel whether it's a sensation or an emotion or some kind of energy or whatever that is, and we're practicing to be able to open up to feeling even things that are uncomfortable. Maybe not in the beginning, but over time. And that itself is not necessarily how do you say it? We have to have the kind of wherewithal to be with something, which is kind of like staying with it, right? Being with it, allowing it, feeling it. These are all kind of ways to say more or less the same thing. And then at the same time, we're not dwelling on it, meaning we're not becoming it. So there's an area we explore in that kind of meditation where we train in feeling but not becoming. So when I say dwell, I'm more referring to like where we identify really strongly with something and we get we get overtaken by it essentially. So there is but it's a subtle thing in practice. It's not so obvious. Yeah. Yeah, good.
That was very helpful. I just want to comment on the fact that open eye meditation is brand new for me.
Sure.
Almost 15 years of meditating. And then I'm like, this is like a brand new world for me. And I think embodiment is to learn at the same time is going to be very helpful. Because I've been suffering for a long time. And the dukkha, has changed over time with me. And I just am so hopeful that there's a way, either in or out, or whatever the term is going to be, just a way through it
Yeah,
with
wonderful.
this technique. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, good news. Oh, I'm glad. That makes me happy. Uh, in English, Dukkha. That's usually how we spell it. What? Oh, probably, yeah. Interesting name. Yeah, I'm always interested in people name their restaurants like Samsara or something like that, you know? Um, yeah, there's a really beautiful quote. I don't know if have the exact quote memorized, but something like this, paraphrasing, um, from a really great Tibetan Buddhist master, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who was one of the first ones to bring Vajrayana Buddhism to the United States. He said something like this: the magic isn't that there's a way out; the magic is that there's a way in. Yeah, very beautiful quote. Yeah, I like these kind of quotes that also provoke us to reflecting a little bit deeper. That's one of those for me. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, go ahead and unmute Roxy.
Hi again, everyone. I had a couple of questions, just kind of about technique. One was, when visualizing, do you recommend that we have our eyes open or closed?
I mean, for that, it's kind of like a preference, but personally, and based off also the advice of His Holiness Dalai Lama, I recommend at least half open. So yeah, half open.
Okay.
Or fully open. Yeah, because we can then begin to develop that capacity of mind to visualize with the eyes open. Yeah.
That's very cool. Then the other was I'm kind of sick right now too, so I think it's a little harder, but how to combat sleepiness and dullness while doing shamatha practice.
Yeah. I'm smiling because it's the same answer. Open the eyes. Yeah.
Even with my eyes open, I was feeling like, but
Oh, okay.
that
You're
might
getting,
just be because I'm sick.
yeah, sometimes, yeah, it's just the body, needs to rest. You know, there's a couple things, there's a few other things like, you can raise the gaze a little bit. So, sometimes when we open the eyes, we're looking down or we have them half open. So you could try like fully opening them and looking straight ahead. So we kind of raise the gaze. Also, there's some other traditional like remedies, that include kind of allowing the body to become cooler. So like sometimes we get sleepy. Oh, this went off again. Oh, okay. We lost picture you, but I think you can.
I'm still here.
Okay. Um, basically like dullness or sleepiness can sometimes happen because we're too cozy. So like, yeah, taking off layers of clothes, um, making the room a little fresher, cooler, that can help. Eating less before meditation can help. What are some other ones? There's also like different levels of dullness. So there's like, how do you say it? When we study shamatha teachings, they talk about the different levels of sort of like a gross torpor or gross dullness, subtle. And so, I think the path of shamatha actually is when we're working with these 9 ways of abiding. That's normally how we teach it. It's kind of a path of like the dullness and excitement get less and more refined. They get less and less gross until we're able to kind of not have any dullness and excitement at all. So in a way, it's sort of like we all work with dullness and excitement, and we need to learn how to remedy them. So yeah, you could try some of those remedies. Caffeine, obviously.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Yeah.
So you mentioned removing dullness and excitement both, right? So for
Well,
me,
it's like a process of
right.
refinement.
So why would excitement be bad?
Well, what this is referring to with excitement, well, there's different. What do you mean by excitement? Maybe that's.
Feeling excited about something,
Oh, okay.
feeling happy,
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know, looking forward to something.
That's a different.
stuff.
We also we also question that in Buddhism, but so that's like another topic. But the way I'm using the word excitement here is just referring to the mind in meditation when a lot of thinking is proliferating.
Okay.
So we just use the word excitement to represent that. I'm trying to think of some other words to represent that, but yeah, it's just when the mind is a little bit out of control, like the monkey mind is kind of, because dullness is the opposite, right? It's when we're kind of sleepy and we're finding it. There's lethargy in the practice, torpor, etc. Excitement is when we just can't settle, and sometimes that's because the thinking mind is really active. And like I said yesterday, thoughts are fine. It's just when we can't settle with thoughts, that's problematic. And usually that's due to excitement, or sometimes the body is just anxious or overactive. So that's how we're using the word excitement.
So when you keep practicing, your feelings of sorrow and happiness reduce, right? Both. Is
Well,
that my correct understanding of the process, or?
sorrow and happiness, you said?
Yeah.
Well, it's like a little bit of a complex thing to discuss, actually, because for the reason kind of is similar to your question about the way you defined excitement. It's like most of us interact with the world based on 3 kinds of misperceptions. The fundamental misperception is a confusion that there is a self, basically, that's distinct and permanent and independent. And then based on that, we also have the idea or the habit to believe in a independent or permanent other. and we become fixated on that. And then it's not like we're thinking about this actively. It just becomes like a type of knee-jerk reaction where we respond based on that. That would be the fundamental confusion. But then comes the next two types of misperception or reaction based on misperception, which are like what happens based on that confusion around what we think we are and what we think other is. We develop either some kind of liking for something, some kind of interest in something, or we develop some kind of rejection or aversion. So in Mahamudra, we use the terms acceptance and rejection. In more basic Dharma, or we could say like more foundational Dharma, they use the terms clinging and aversion. And we refer to these as like afflictive states, that they're actually states that are causing us suffering. But most of us, that's how we function. Or sometimes if we're not functioning in clinging or aversion, we're functioning more in like a neutrality, but neutrality is not seen as like a positive thing here. It's also a state of, it's not neutral as like a spiritual kind of neutral. It's neutral as like an afflicted dullness, kind of like a kind of checked out. I don't know how to put it, but something like that. And so we familiarize with these states, and that's part of exploring dukkha, is we also explore our afflictive emotions, which are the causes of dukkha from a Buddhist perspective. And we learn to understand them, of course, through learning and reflecting on the Dharma, but most importantly through direct awareness and having insight into how they function in our mind and behavior. And we start to see how insidious they are, how repetitive, how do you say it? How like how they cause us a lot of pain and suffering actually. And then at the end of the day, kind of for like a yogi, it's a little bit like how boring they are. They're kind of boring. So once that happens and a practitioner is developing some relationship of first maybe like a thirst to exit that way of working in one's life, but they don't yet know where to go. There's not like a clear idea. Oh, I need to go there. I need to do this. Of course, we study the Dharma. When we're serious about this, we study, we learn. There's a lot to learn. We reflect. And then as we meditate and experience, we also grow some kind of, there's like in that way of letting go of that kind of acceptance, rejection mentality, we start to interact or find another way. Slowly for most of us. It's not right away. I mean, we're talking for most of us some years, right? And of course, it takes some effort. And then we start to find another way that doesn't necessarily produce that temporary happiness we were talking like that comes from clinging, and also doesn't produce that strong, aggression that comes from aversion, right? Or subtle forms of aggression. Instead, we start to kind of be able to taste experiences that we could say like have joy in them. But I don't know. I'm really just because I want to be, I don't want to give people false promises or also point you in a wrong direction. I'm not sure if that joy is necessarily happiness, but we might say it can sometimes be experienced as happiness, but it's something else. It's like the joy of not being bored with aversion and clinging anymore. So a yogi or yogini starts to develop that. And then, of course, when we're developing something like that, we start to get more like we want more, like we're developing a taste for that. And we're developing a taste for freedom or liberation. And so there's this joy that comes because we're not burdened by those as much. And then, of course, the biggest joy on the Buddhist path comes from knowing our nature, or knowing our essence, or knowing our Buddha nature. And that is that root confusion I was talking about, that root misperception. So as that gets remedied, that's where the true freedom lies for a practitioner or someone who's interested in this kind of a path and awakening. And then there's again a joy of knowing the truth. But again, truth is a really interesting word here, because we have to use it because we're using language, but actually, like, the truth is there's no truth, kind of. but there is, you know, in the sense there's like some abiding reality that we uncover, but that reality is also not a reality. It's something that's interdependent and changing, and yet we can interact with that, and we know how to flow with that. So I kind of I try to use language a little bit more in a relatable way, but I also try to be careful because I like this word fluidity and flow a lot, because when you meet people like Solen's Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, really realized beings, you see a lot of fluidity, right, in how they interact with the world. But this is not like that guy on the golf course who's like, I'm just in the flow when I'm hitting the ball. We're not talking about that kind of fluidity. That's like not that interesting for somebody who wants to wake up. Sort of like, it's like I don't know, like a leadership I don't know how to put it, but anyways. So it's like, that's not bad. It's just the kind of fluidity I'm talking about is much more subtle, because one doesn't necessarily find a self that exists independently anymore. Also, one doesn't find another. So what is there not to be fluid with? Because everything is moving. And so then there's a different kind of joy that takes over at that point. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know if I would call it happiness. And then we would say, strictly, like using kind of maybe some language from this tradition, it's like the joy of knowing happiness and suffering are equal. And then they find this other thing. I think that's what's interesting. See, that's what I'm trying to get across this weekend. It's like, we're always obsessed. The dualistic mind just gets obsessed. All it has is two options: black, white, right, wrong, yes, no. How do you say it? Clinging aversion, right? Two choices. And so we're habituated to that. And that's part of the fundamental suffering that the Buddha is talking about. Because there's many layers to dukkha, but now I'm talking at a very subtle layer. But if we don't talk about this layer, I think kind of like talking about the other layers it might not go in the right direction, Often we have to present the top gross layers first. Otherwise, this layer I'm talking about is kind of not that understandable to most people. So we have to talk about the top layers first. But the problem now I see in the modern meditation world, and all of us are, we can understand. I mean, we might not understand exactly what I'm talking about, but we can kind of play with it in our minds. We have that kind of ability. So I don't think it's that far reaching. But I think in the modern meditation world, if we don't talk about this possibility, then most of the things get sort of boxed in to this approach of trying to perfect ourselves or perfect the world. But as I said yesterday, this is a pointless activity from a Buddhist perspective, because we're already perfect. So it's just that's covered over, so we don't perceive that. So the Buddhist path is like, connect with the practices and approach where you'll be able to uncover that, And so then, rather than trying to perfect or fix something. So, because again, our clinging and aversion are constantly in this battle to fix, right? I mean, this is how I am. I mean, yesterday I had to upgrade my phone, and I don't have service because the company switched something. And anyway, I don't want to get in. I get in complain mode too easily. So I'm not complaining. I'm just using this as an example, right? So I don't have a phone, and therefore I can't get into any apps because I can't get two-factor authentication to like sign in to like basic things. See what I'm saying? You all know this is like the modern person's, big suffering, right? So anyways, my mind immediately goes to, like, as do the people helping me in the store and things like that, to like, how do we fix this, And yeah, of course, this kind of relative thing is fixable. So why not? We should try to fix it, right? It's not actually, I need to, otherwise I need to figure out another way to live. I can't transfer money places and things like that. So anyways, so that level is fine, like working with the relative world on that level. But when it comes to mind and our fundamental human predicaments, that's when it gets a little bit iffy, that we can sort of like go to the cell phone store and just boop, boop, boop and call the tech support and it's fixed. You see what I'm saying? It's not the it's not the same kind of phenomena. Doesn't necessarily work in the same way. So this fix it mentality is something these texts are teaching us how to let go of. And then we find this other way, which is not through clinging and aversion, you know? It's through this other way. And we find this, based on your question, we find this other joy. That's not the temporary joy and excitement of what we think of as pleasurable. Make sense?
It's more like a liberation.
Exactly. Yeah, this is what yeah, I'm talking about liberation. But you know what, we have to get into the weeds a little bit of like, what does liberation mean? Otherwise it's vague. You know what I mean? I mean, the problem is it's going to be vague for a long time. You know, it's just that we have to have something to, like I said, to interest us, to have passion. You know, we need some clinging. We need clinging for liberation in the beginning, or maybe Buddhists aren't so comfortable with that word. So we would say we need some passion. We need some interest. We need some, you know, so it's not like, I think this can be a mistake where we want to get rid of all clinging, including clinging to any kind of path or any kind of thing. And it's like, yeah, we're gonna have a really difficult time. You know what I mean? Like we're gonna have a really tough time. Because our minds that are just where they are, at the level of some of the saints who these teachings come from, like Milarepa, Talopa, you know, Marpa, Naropa, etc. These great Buddhist, you know, Mahasiddhas. Yeah, they don't need to cling to any kind of path anymore. They've exhausted that. But they wouldn't have gotten anywhere if they didn't have passion for the path and for the Dharma. So they started with some passion and some interest. And then as they pursued non-duality and the practice of it, slowly different things get exhausted. And then at the end, as the Buddha says, when you take the boat to the other shore, you don't carry the boat. There's no point in carrying the boat onto the shore with you. The boat served its purpose. It got you from one shore to the other. And the other shore, in this case, is liberation. But, you know, we have to be absolutely sure we have landed on that shore. Otherwise, we might jump off the boat in the middle of the ocean and be eaten by sharks. So, you know, that's it's a tricky thing. I've heard Western meditation teachers sometimes. I'm just saying this not to criticize anyone, more for us to develop our discernment. I've heard Western meditation teachers saying, like, quote this quote from the Buddha, but in a way where they're saying, oh, we need to abandon like any kind of, how do you say it, religious path, because people have this allergy towards religion, but actually all we're talking about is a way. You know, the Dharma is a way. We can take it, I guess, in a religious way. I personally don't, but I still engage with all of this. You know, when I was a monk, I still wore my robes. I changed my name. I shaved my head. And when I do practices with Buddhist deities and visualization, I chant, I recite mantras because it's part of the system. It's part of the interdependence of the practice. So we could take it in some religious way, but I often think that's just a bias where we see it in a certain way. But if we understand it as, like I said, there's other layers of interdependence at play, then we can open up really healthy relationships to these things. Just like the healthy relationship of, you know, I need to deal with tech support. You know what I'm saying? So, or putting gas in the car or having money in the bank. So I don't know. I like to relate with these things practically because then we can kind of get out of these weird views we get into, like, you know, how do we say, oh, I want to create my own boat, you know, and therefore it's going to be better because I did it. You know, we have a lot of like hyper individualism in the modern West. And so there's this, which again can be good in some ways, but in other ways it can really hamper us because it's like we have 2,600 years of people refining this boat that liberates us. Why would we try to do it ourselves? But the truth is, we have to get in the boat and paddle it ourselves. No one's going to paddle it for us, but we can benefit from all these beautiful teachings. So, anyways, you weren't asking that, but it just triggered that for me because it's a it's like this balance. You all see what I'm saying? It's sort of like any kind of bias is going to trip us up here. So we really need to open these biases. I think that's what the Dharma does really beautifully. Okay, so before lunch, I wanted to go a little bit more into this. So this is we've been working with this song from Milarepa, which we'll return to after lunch. But this other text, the Mahamudra root text of the Gun and oral tradition, we are on the section on shamatha or Mahamudra shamatha. And now I believe we stopped on the third page where it says when mind bound in entangles relax without doubt, it frees itself. In accordance with these statements, relax without becoming distracted. Okay. Really like this text is very beautiful because it it goes into the view in some depth and in a little bit. And actually it has a lot of good advice for meditation, for this kind of meditation. So, even this even this line here, in accordance with these statements, relax without becoming distracted. Really, I'm not kidding. If you just use that instruction and practice it, it's enough. Relax without becoming distracted. It's just that most of us, we're too up in our heads. So it's difficult to relate to like a small instruction like that. But that's all we need, actually. So anyways, he goes on to say, the Panchen Lama, as you look at the nature of whatever conceptual thoughts arise, they disappear on their own and a vacuity dawns. Similarly, if you investigate when the mind is still, a non-obstructing and empty clarity is vivid. It is called seeing that stillness and movement are integrated. Okay, so here he's actually pointing out like an experience that we develop. So I want to just highlight that's not necessarily something you're going to see like in your next meditation. This takes time, these kinds of things, to develop it. But we can come back to that. So I'll continue. Recognize this movement in the mind, whatever conceptual thoughts are generated, and without blocking them, focus on their nature. This is similar to the example of the bird that flies from a boat, as it is said, like the crow that flies off a boat, and after circling around it, lands on it again. Having practiced in this way, the nature of any equipoise is a space of vacuity, since it is non-obstructing, lucid, clear, and unobstructed by anything material. It is also vivid, since anything can appear. This reality of the mind is indeed perceived directly with insight, but it can't be indicated, grasped at, or named as this. These days, most of the great meditators of the land of snow agree that placing the mind in a relaxed manner on whatever dawns without grasping is renowned as, quote, instruction kindling Buddhahood. Aichoki Gyaltsen say that for beginners, this is an amazingly skillful method establishing stillness of the mind and a way to introduce the conventional mind. So we talked about this a little bit yesterday. We have two different kind of ways that we describe mind on the level of meditation here. One is the conventional or relative mind, and then one is the ultimate or absolute nature of mind. The point we in order to liberate ourselves, we need to make contact with the absolute nature of mind. So that's going to come after lunch, but at least the verses, but not necessarily you'll make contact with it. So I want to be careful of what I'm saying here. Like, right? I don't want to promise anything too high, but we'll talk about it. But making contact with the relative nature also takes time. So what is this relative nature? Remember, I described mind yesterday as having the aspect of thinking, like it can think. It can think. It can know. It can be aware, which is that quality we're training in meditation. And then it has this aspect of clarity. Now, just to repeat a little bit on that, clarity here doesn't mean like the clarity of the thinking mind. That's not what or like how fresh our mind is or how awake we are. This is talking about more the backdrop of mind. again, the conventional or the relative nature of mind. Nature here just means it's like it's base, it's earth, it's ground. When all of the other kind of all the other movement kind of ceases and all the minutia of mind ceases, this is the base, but it's also the base everything is coming out of, right? So this is why it's very interesting here. It's usually we describe it as it's not a literal light, but it's just like something that's on. And as I said yesterday, the clarity aspect of mind is what it is fundamentally. It's on all the time, whether we're asleep, awake, etc. It's why we can perceive. It's why we can think. It's why we can be aware. It's why anything happens to us. So it's that clarity that is our, like I said yesterday, I don't know if this is accurate, but I think of it kind of as the base of our sentience, right? And this is what makes the main difference between a sentient being and a non-sentient being or sentient object, right? So now we're in all this kind of discussion and how do you say it, excitement or non-excitement around AI and all this stuff. You know, the idea of like, what is it, general AI? Is that when they become sentient? Does anyone know the term when they huh? Generative would be when they are considered to be sentient. Huh? No, generative AI. Sorry. So then so then anyways, so Buddhism has kind of a really interesting, because again, there's a different science here. There's a different idea of phenomenon, what things are. From a Buddhist perspective, it's uh, because of being clear and knowing, because of having this clarity aspect, essentially there's sentience. We would also say, I like this teacher Zongso Khyentse Rinpoche. He said it in a recent teaching. He was talking about AI and he made it very clear and just very simple. And he said, you know, really, unless something tries to remedy or move away from its own pain, we can't necessarily say it's sentient. So as soon as something from its side, not like faking it, because AI will be able to fake being human, or they probably already does, right? Meaning it can very convincingly, it can very like whatever, it could convince us that it wants that or whatever, but that's not necessarily true. But if somehow we're able to discover an AI is from its own side trying to move away from suffering, we would call that a sentient being from a Buddhist perspective. That was his take. And I like that because it's very interesting. It's also a nice reflection for us. But another definition would be this clear and knowing mind, right? Again, which could be kind of faked, but the real thing can't be faked, right? Like our own subjective experience, we know what that is, our perception, etc. So in this, what he's saying here, why I'm saying all this is that in our meditation, in our shamatha without support or our Mahamudra shamatha, we come to an experience of that layer of mind. How do we come to that? By settling the mind. So that's the whole, all we've been talking about so far, meditation wise. How to settle the mind in openness through practicing rest or relaxation, but also not being distracted. What does not being distracted means? It means we're aware. What does relax mean? It just means we're settled. You know, we're not necessarily pursuing anything in particular. You know, relaxation as this comforting kind of checked out experience. That's not at all what this means, right? Here, there's a lot of vividness in the meditation, openness, knowing, awareness, non-distraction, but also the base of all that, we peel away eventually once thinking settles a little bit. Then we can kind of abide in, maybe is a way to say it, abide in this clear aspect of mind, or the mind's relative nature, which isn't liberative, but it's a step in the direction of liberation. Okay? So that's what all these verses are pointing to, essentially. And then we also start to work with the movement of mind. And what does movement here mean? It means thought movement. So remember I said yesterday, in this style of meditation, there's actually no problem at all with thoughts. Actually, when we get to the Vipassana section, sometimes for some meditators, the more thoughts, the better, actually, because they're recognizing the essence of thought. So thought also has a nature, to make it, how do you say it? It's the same nature as the nature of our minds and the nature of everything. So that makes it a little bit more relatable. But thought, the point is to know the nature of thought. And here we kind of use as a bridge, not trying to preference stillness so much. So that's also what is happening in these verses, where first we need to develop some stillness, because otherwise we're just, we're beholden to the monkey who just wants to jump everywhere and run everywhere. And hey, look at that, look at this, become excited, all the time. And that excitement takes us out of the moment. It takes us out of being aware. So we work on that stillness a little bit. That's a practice. But we don't work on stillness by trying to push thoughts away. We work on stillness by becoming aware of thinking. Right? So there's a distinction. We talked about it yesterday a little bit. And this is something you'll have to resolve, but I'm happy to answer more questions on it. But it's something we resolve through meditation. It doesn't get resolved through like, how do I do that? We can't resolve everything through thinking it out. We need to eventually go into the practice and work with it. But either way, that stillness is very useful. But as a bridge moving into the Vipassana practice of Mahamudra, we also start to work with movement or allowing movement. So we have this kind of, remember how I kept mentioning, try to become the awareness that can host experience, that can host perceptions, that can host thoughts. So eventually that's how we start to work with movement, where we can simply rest in awareness, relax and undistracted. And at the same time, anything can come in and out. Remember, I kept alluding to that yesterday in the guided meditation. Practice in a way where you're not blocking anything. Hence why I'm recommending open the eyes. Don't block your experience. Because when we do that, it becomes a preliminary kind of, or a way to develop a practice where we're not blocking our thoughts. Because a lot of us have this, it's a strong habit, no? I have it, we have this strong habit when we meditate not to think, or not that, meaning we interpret that there should be no thoughts. And if there's thoughts, we're doing it wrong, right? Does anybody have that, that interpretation? I don't know where this comes from. I used to get it when I was a monk. I would, when I was traveling and going through airports, I pretty much wore my robes all the time until the last year I was a monk. Then I was, you get one taste of anonymity, and it's really hard not to go. It's really hard to go. But meaning, like in public, when you wear robes, it's like, it's like, and you're a 6'2", white guy. It's like, how do you say it? It's like Halloween year round. People, they don't know what to do with you. So there's no anonymity. So at some point, I put on jeans, and I was like, and it was just like something. It was a mistake. So I'm glad I waited till the last year I was a monk to do it, because, it wasn't. It's not a good idea to do that, because it's addictive, because then you have your anonymity back. But anyways, the robes have a purpose. So I tried to wear them for most of the time I was a monk, all the time. And so when I traveled in airports, people would inevitably come up to me if we're waiting for a flight or something. And a lot of people, first of all, they'd say, "Are you really a Buddhist monk?" Because it's just like, I thought the Buddhist monk is Asian. Everybody has this kind of bias in their head, right? And I'd be like, "Yeah, I am." And then they'd say, "Oh, I really want to learn how to meditate, but every time I do it, I just can't stop my thoughts." And I look at them and I said, "What idiot told you to do that?" Like, who told you to do that? Because I feel bad for that, because due to that, they don't continue due to some misdirected instruction. Now, I better be careful here. I'm gonna, how do you say it? Take back this term idiot, because I gotta be careful here. Some other styles of meditation and traditions, they do emphasize this kind of blankness, right? Buddhism doesn't. So I don't want to disparage somebody else's tradition, right? Buddhism doesn't, in general. And so, how do you say it? So I would tell them who taught you that. And it was just, like I said, kind of sad, because maybe they quit meditating because they had this idea. And we all have this idea. And at the same time, even if we don't have this idea, like maybe we're talking this weekend and you kind of like, yeah, cool. We kind of still don't want the thought. Why? I mean, you have to explore that for yourself. For me, it's because usually most of my thoughts are uncomfortable. So what am I really pushing away in the meditation is uncomfort. Again, coming back to this theme I keep talking about. So when we learn to welcome thoughts, we're also learning to welcome uncomfort. And also the problem when we welcome thoughts in the beginning is, yep, we're going to probably lose awareness and go into thinking. So it's kind of like there's an element of not just rejecting uncomfort, but I think there's this element of trying to be perfect at it. You know, I have that tendency to of perfectionism and trying to get it right, you know? I hope it's becoming more clear through these teachings. There's no right. It's just doing it, going for it with the right view or a view of liberation and bodhicitta, etc. So anyway, so this is just something we each have to work out. There's no magic bullet. Even just talking about it here is not going to solve it for you. You just have to meditate and you work it out. But I think through hearing the idea that thoughts aren't the problem, it does flavor our approach, right? A little bit differently. Maybe for some of you this weekend, it even flavored it differently. So that's useful, I think. So we flavor it differently, and then we need to learn that approach. There's a wonderful quote from that maybe you can remember from time to time from Suzuki Roshi, who was one of the first Zen masters to come from Japan to the United States early on. I mean, yeah, and he said, when you meditate, leave all of your windows and doors open. Anything can come inside, just don't serve them tea. So it's a really nice analogy, right? So leave all of your windows and doors open. All of your neighbors, family, everybody can come inside. Just don't serve them tea. And that's one way to talk about what I was saying yesterday of learning to be a good host when we meditate. I mean, I guess a good host serves them tea. So, but it depends where you're from. But also, a host is also relaxed and lets people be free. So, actually, another way to think of this is we're allowing thoughts their own freedom and their own right. But our right is to not be hijacked by them. You see what I'm saying? That's what we're practicing. That's important. Hence why awareness is so key here, strengthening that muscle and developing it, and etc. So essentially in Mahamudra meditation, this also becomes a bridge into Vipassana because we start to look back. We start to look back at thoughts. We start to look back at perceptions. We look back at our sense of self. And then in we're not going to go too much into it, but if you want to, receive transmission from a qualified, Vajrayana master in the Mahamudra tradition, based on that transmission, which is another kind of communication, then all kinds of subtle practices open up for asking questions, for looking back in the mind and doing all this kind of thing. We're going to kind of go a different route here, but that's another style, which is very helpful. And this way of working with movement in the mind can become a bridge to that, because first we have to be able to allow things, and then we can start to look at things. It goes back to what do I mean by look? I mean, look with the mind at mind, look with the mind, or look with awareness. And it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of yesterday. Embedded in this for me is a certain kind of curiosity, non-bias, and openness, right? Because we need a certain level of openness to even be able to do that, right? We need a certain level of objectivity that we've developed in our meditation. So for most people, myself included, one of the first kind of aha moments in meditation is, I don't have to be my thoughts, right? And this is a very, I think, for people who experience that, it's a very liberating experience, because most of us are so embedded with them, and our identities are so embedded with what we feel and think. And then comes the dilemma. Do I continue on and dissociate from what I think and feel? Or do I learn a way to allow thinking and feeling and at the same time not becoming thinking and feeling. And that's more what this path is, right? So, you know, anyways, another topic about dissociation, but so yeah, so essentially at that point we can develop then the awareness stronger, and then we can bridge from resting in nowness to turning the mind to look at itself, to investigate. So Vipassana meditation, which is kind of based on shamatha, which we've only been talking about shamatha so far, or meditative awareness, or sometimes we translate it as calm abiding, right? And it's really, the purpose is really strengthening one style of calm abiding. It's for developing deeper levels of abiding and deeper levels of rest that is undistracted. Another way we could say is like where our single pointed, concentration can develop. But I think that can be misleading, that kind of language. So I think it's tricky. But anyways, some people translate it like that. I think it's more deeper levels of abiding, right? And abiding in what? Abiding in nowness, and abiding in non-distraction, devoid of excitement and dullness. So one could develop that way. Another style is sort of allowing this aware quality of mind to become so strong that it's just there, and then it's stable. It's not wavered easily, like like a candle in the wind. It has like a very a wall around it or a glass around it. We've kind of built that experience, but we also don't have to block things, and we can start to then turn the awareness in Vipassana meditation to look at things. And why do we want to look at things? Why do we want to investigate things, or how do you say it? Open up a sort of conversation with them. No, I'm using quote unquote conversation. It's so we can get to know how things are functioning. We can get to know the nature of things. We can get to discern the causes of suffering from the causes of awakening. And, in line with what I've been sharing so far, we can uncover our Buddha nature, right? So Vipassana is actually the main practice in Buddhism. Main practice. It's just that we need some level of shamatha to access Vipassana. Otherwise, the monkey mind is going to take over, and we're not going to be able to do much. So Mahamudra has this particular way of Mahamudra shamatha of developing stillness, then working with movement, and movement becomes that bridge, as I said, to work, not all of it, but this is one way to talk about it, a way to then work with Vipassana, which we'll see after lunch. Okay, so I'll kind of leave it there. And anything just on your minds before we break for lunch, or? Cool, yeah. Do you guys have a microphone? Or because they won't want to record it.
So I get the impression that it's in Buddhist meditation, the mind is.
Can you hold it a little closer?
Oh, so I get the impression that in Buddhist meditation, so I'm curious. I have a meditation practice that's not inconsistent with the basics. However, I got the impression that there's also an active, reflective quality to your meditation, which until just now you mentioned vipassana. So it sounds like the active reflection of your Buddha nature, your relationship to your whatever is showing up, and whatever you're allowing, that meditation practice is vipassana. Is that the
Well,
distinction between what we were doing earlier versus?
yeah. So just a few things, because we talked about it a lot yesterday. So basically, we have these phases of learning, reflection, and meditation, and those are based on something called view, meditation, and conduct. So like that's why I'm going into some detail here, because Buddhist meditation is based on a view.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about this a lot yesterday. we don't just meditate. We meditate based on where we're aiming. So where we want to aim the sail of our ship or the rudder. And we become very kind of direct on that. And therefore, like a lot of Buddhism starts with study. It doesn't actually start with meditation. It starts with learning. And you know, we keep an open mind to that. And, you know, we there's some effort that takes. And then we reflect on that. And the reflection phase, we can apply skepticism, we can apply rigorous testing and analysis, and that helps to refine our understanding. Of course, we do that with a sense of openness, but more it's like this passion for truth. And then the reflection, what comes out of that is a kind of confidence that when we go into the meditation on something, we have an aim, we have a direction, but we also kind of have a confidence that we then explore without the need for a conclusion. So that's the meditation phase. And meditation in Buddhism, basically, there's two categories of methods of how we meditate. One category is shamatha, one category is vipassana. So all of meditation in Buddhism can fit into one of those categories. Shamatha, like I said, is mostly most meditation, including secular mindfulness, is cherry picked from shamatha. That's basically where it's pulled from. And so shamatha, so a lot of people, when they think of what meditation is, they just think of shamatha because that's what's taught widely as meditation, and also is in common with other religions, right? And so shamatha, we're mainly trying to stabilize this awareness. So we're like a candle that's not blown all over the place, as I was saying. But then for a Buddhist practitioner, the more interesting thing is using that strength or muscle of awareness to actually free ourselves. And for that, we need vipassana or insight meditation.
Okay.
And now I'm getting into your question.
Yes.
Hold on one second. So vipassana has many styles, just as shamatha has many styles. There's not one style. I'm teaching a style of shamatha here, more related to the Mahamudra tradition of Tibetan and Indian Buddhism. We call it shamatha without support, or open awareness, or sometimes objectless meditation. And anyways, it still develops the quality of shamatha. It just does it in a different way. So vipassana has also many different kinds of techniques and practices. People often confuse vipassana with a certain 10-day retreat. That's one style of vipassana coming from Southeast Asia, you know, and the Theravada traditions of Buddhism. Wonderful. But there's also many other styles of vipassana. In Tibetan Buddhism, we generally practice three styles. And this is getting to your question. The first one is analytical meditation. And that's we're going to cover that a little bit today, but not so much, because Mahamudra doesn't really use that style. It uses it a little bit, but yeah, I should take that back. It uses it a little bit, but in a different kind of way. And analytical meditation basically involves some kind of process, whether it's through reasoning and thinking or through directly looking at. Mahamudra, we more directly look at something. Some kind of way, like you said, of investigating. But we either do that with awareness or we do that with reasoning and logic. And it has this combination of investigating, what we call pulling apart, like pulling something apart to reveal what it is, and then resting with shamatha. So we still use shamatha. So that's that style. The next style would be through metaphor. So sometimes we practice vipassana through. So a lot of the sutras of the Buddha, he used a lot of metaphors, right, to describe the nature of reality. And so sometimes we can use those metaphors as reflections and ways to meditate on, like, again, this text, which we started yesterday, this is using metaphor. So Milarepa says, you know, take the sky as your example and train in meditation state without center or edge. So one could also use that kind of, oh, does the sky have a center or edge? And we use that as a way to investigate the nature of things. Anyways, so that's the second type of Vipassana styles. And I don't want to say they're one technique. There's many techniques within each of these. And the third one is called direct, more direct. This comes more through transmission-based lineages in Vajrayana Buddhism. And these are like, they don't really use analysis at all. And they use just awareness like the rawness of awareness and directly looking at the mind or directly looking at something or something's nature. And these are usually introduced in a very like intimate guru student relationship, meaning like intimate just means the guru like the guru has checked the student and the student is actually going to put in the time and effort and has the ability to gain realization in that style. So they take on the responsibility of serving that student to bring them to liberation. And the student has done their job of checking the teacher to make sure they're not a charlatan. And that takes time. That takes some years, you know? It's not like, oh, you're my guru because I saw you on YouTube. Please don't do that, you know? We need to be very careful here. Not because necessarily there's some charlatan out there like waiting to deceive you, more because we need to have confidence in our mind that we trust this person. And trust takes time, you know, and still they're a human being. So we have to understand how to work with a human being and all of that. But anyways, those kinds of direct Vipassana are based on that kind of relationship. So Mahamudra has that too. So yeah, just giving, and I hope that's helpful for other people that I'm using your question as a way to introduce Vipassana now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I have more questions, but
Yeah, I mean,
I think this.
oh yeah, maybe we should do lunch. Yeah. Yeah, after lunch we could talk more. And we'll actually begin to define first the view that we're meditating on in Vipassana, and then we'll do a little practice. Okay, everyone? Yeah. Oh, she wants to do a picture, yeah.
Yeah. And can I ask a question that can be answered later?
Okay.
And I
yeah.
want to throw it out before I forget because it's I need some clarification related to vividness and clarity. And this is in relation to yesterday's practice when you I think some point you mentioned to kind of have clear perception, not like blurry.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of crank up that vividness and clarity. And I'm trying to understand in relation to the text, the Panchen Lama's text, when he talks about vividness and clarity, um, is it the clarity? I'm guessing is the clarity of the knowingness, but how is that related to the clarity of the perception of the eye perception? When I relax, because for me, let's say I just relax the gaze, but then like the visual perception, like not so clear sometimes, it's just kind of a little blurry. So that's kind of where my confusion is right now. So you can
No, it's
address
a good
it.
question. Can you ask it again in the beginning of after the lunch break?
I can ask again, but it may come
No,
out.
I
different
understand
flavor.
it, but
Yeah.
just remind me.
Yes, I will.
Because
Okay.
otherwise I'm gonna have to do like super short, and it's a few different things you touched on, so it requires like a little bit of detail.
Okay.